Your Excellencies, it's a great pleasure to have our lasting 2 days conference, which we are doing with the United Nations office in Geneva. And we're extremely grateful to the Director General, Madam Tatiana Valovaya, and Chief of Staff, Dr. David Chikwaidze, who have been extraordinarily helpful, like doing all this program and arrangements. And I think that as an NGO, international organization, it was a privilege for us after UN General Assembly to come here symbolically to discuss about the most important issues, which is concerning everyone. If, with your allowance, I would like to ask Madam President Vaira Vike-Freiberga, co-chair of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, to join us for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Rovshan. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Nizami Ganjavi International Center, may I reiterate the thanks that Rovshan just expressed about our gratitude to the United Nations office in Geneva, to her Director General, her Chef de Cabinet, and to all those who work in the ranks of the UN in various capacities, have participated together with the invited speakers from the NGIC in this most interesting and valuable discussion of yesterday and today. We are, as my colleague Zlatko Lagomji reminded our dear guest Caitlin, we are a non-governmental organization as NGIC, albeit a great many among its members and its board of international trustees have held office either as former presidents, prime ministers, ministers, high-level officials of international and leaders of international bodies. But when you put together the collective experience, I think, of all of us, before we held official government positions and after we finished our terms, I believe that there would be no doubt that we are indeed laboring in the vineyards of the Lord, which are those of civil society. In the discussions we had over these past 2 days, we have touched on the United Nations and its noble goals and evaluated the, if you like, presented a diagnosis of how far we have come in achieving them, as well as trying to point out paths, solutions that could improve this international collaboration in the future. We heard about the fact that on the international scene, despite the declarations of the United Nations General Assembly, governments, countries, as members of this noble organization, tend to behave in a way you might almost say inversely proportional to their level of military and economic weight. The greater the economic and military weight of a country, the less it feels inclined to listen to the voices of those who represent smaller countries, less developed countries, countries with insignificant or very slight military capabilities. This is an important principle that the United Nations, in its statements and its principles, has tried to overcome. But of course, when you have power in your hands, it is a challenge. And this is where civil society comes in, to implement those things, because they represent not just selfish interests of each country separately, but the enlightened self-interest of the world at large. When Zlatko pointed out to the connections between the different topics that we have addressed, let us remember that all of these areas that we have touched upon, the peace and security, the sustainable development goals, the inclusion of all levels of society, gender equality as one of the more glaring signs of inequality in societies, the chasm, the gap between the very rich and the very poor that still exists in the world, all of these are matters of those who are benefiting from a certain situation. In other words, as psychologists in the behavioral age, when I was trained, would say, well, those who are rewarded for their actions will repeat them. And unless they are punished, they will not stop. The civil society that we're talking about is one way of, if you like, putting pressure on those governments that have the most power, at the same time as arenas of discourse, such as the United Nations, not just the General Assembly where everybody reads their own set piece about declaring where their country stands, but among ambassadors where debates really occur, among the various subsidiary bodies of the United Nations, which accomplish wonderful work, but also come up against great obstacles in achieving all their goals. All of these can benefit from a public worldwide that is informed about what happens in the world, hence the role of education, that is healthy enough to have the nerve to stand up. And here we're talking about the sustainable government, the sustainable development goals that ask to ensure that everybody should have access to clean drinking water, access to shelter, access to healthcare, and so on and so forth and so forth, not to mention food. These goals must be achieved if humanity is to survive. It is as simple as that. Climate change must be tackled if the planet is to survive in a manner that is inhabitable by Homo sapiens as a species. And no doubt the planet will continue living its X billions of years that its lifetime has been predicted by scientists. But will it have us, or if you like, our children, grandchildren, our sisters and brothers? Will it have the human race represented on it? Curiously enough, it seems it will depend on, or if you like, on the will of the gods, as we would have said in former days, or on the processes already set in motion on our planet. And the question is, are we still, with our human ability to interfere and to correct our behavior, are we able to stop the inexorable path of climate warming that we are seeing happening today? We have seen how peace and war are continuing to be alternatives, that one day you have peace in a region and the next something all of a sudden springs up. And today, again, looking at the news, one sees alarming incidences of tensions mounting. People talk about a Cold War being reborn in a new guise. But when a country acquires nuclear submarines, frankly, it is difficult to imagine that it is confident about its ability to continue living a peaceful life without being threatened. It is obviously a reaction to a feeling of insecurity and threat. And these are, I would say, rather extreme measures that a country has to take. When a country like Denmark, we heard in the debate, institutes a new ministry for relations of governments, of the Danish government in this instance, with international corporations. It is recognizing the fact that governments, countries are not the only big players in today's world. For decades now, it is not a new phenomenon. For decades now, many international corporations have had budgets that far exceeded the national budget of the countries in which they were located. I remember as a young woman reading about an Italian company, Olivetti, that manufactured typewriters, among other things, that already decades ago had a budget bigger than the Italian government. All these considerations lead us to what sort of conclusions? We cannot only count on governments to do what needs to be done. We cannot count only on supranational organizations, although we should do everything we can to activate them, help them, and support them. We really need to extend the number of people across the world who understand the concept of enlightened self-interest and how, by taking into account the complexity of the world, the interconnections, the multiple networks of delivery chains and mutual influences and domino effects of any intervention that humans do into nature, if we come to understand that better, then we can hope for a better world. And of course, I will express here my personal prejudice in saying that I do not see how otherwise it can be achieved than by a process of education, by a process of information, by a process of continued change, about which I think just about all our speakers have spoken and have referred to. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to everybody for the suggestions, the very helpful suggestions they have made. I hope that they can be conveyed to those to whom they are addressed. And I hope that all those, both governmental, supragovernmental, and civil society activists will continue in their path and in their efforts to ensure that Homo sapiens really deserves the name that it was originally and rather ambitiously given, and that the species has a chance of survival on a planet that is sufficiently friendly to allow for our survival. Thank you, and farewell to you all.
Dear Madam President, thank you so much for being with us all these days and for your leadership. That was very important for NGIC success. Now, I would like to invite Madam Tatiana Valovaya, who was our co-host and who did every single thing with all the staff members of the United Nations office at Geneva to make this event to be successful. Madam Tatiana.
It was a great honor and privilege to have you over these 2 days here in Geneva. And really, I am very thankful to our co-host, Nizami Ganjavi Foundation, for organizing this event. I am very grateful to my own team and to my staff for making this possible, both in a virtual and hybrid way. I think we participated in a new type of conferencing, not only because it was a hybrid meeting, but because it was really the conference organized both by international organizations, United Nations, and non-governmental organization. And I think that's exactly what makes us different from many other discussions. Really, I said yesterday that this meeting comes at a very timely time, ideal time, I would say, because even before the pandemic, it was absolutely clear that the world is in the process of transition to a new economic and social paradigm. Transition which is normal for human societies, but rather rare. It comes every several centuries, and we're happy or unhappy to live in time of these great changes. And it was clear even before the pandemic that there are certain global challenges to which we have to find the answer. And these challenges are growing mistrust, global mistrust. Countries do not trust each other. Citizens do not trust their governments. Citizens do not trust many groups within themselves. We saw the rise of this mistrust. We saw the rise of hate speech, and Secretary General was very tough on all these issues. We saw growing geopolitical tensions, and these geopolitical tensions have reached the level unprecedented since the Second World War. We saw the challenge of the climate change, which is really looming in front of us. We saw the challenges of new technologies and digitalization, and not only positive challenges to which we have to find the answer, but very negative scenarios, including new divide, digital divide. We saw the challenges of the dark side of modern technologies, where we really have to find answers to keep our values, our ethics, our morals intact. So all these challenges were before the pandemic. Pandemic made these challenges even more obvious, because we really saw during the pandemic that inequalities were really coming to unprecedented levels, and those who were vulnerable before the pandemic or discriminated before the pandemic, they became less vulnerable. We saw the challenges of the climate change, but during the pandemic, when we had to stop our activities, we immediately saw how positively nature reacted, because immediately in many parts of the world, we saw clear skies. We did not have traditional smoke, and the waters in the rivers were much brighter and clear. And so we really saw that we immediately, if humanity makes necessary decisions, we can really overcome this climate change. We also saw how dependent we are on digital and modern technologies, because during the pandemic, we're really relying more and more on digital part of our activities, and that allowed us to go on with our lives, to go on with delivering our mandates, to go on working. So we really saw that pandemic was just really a loop which showed us all these challenges. And now it's the time to draw lessons from the pandemic and to think what should be and could be done. One thing for me is absolutely clear. Before pandemic, we already had the roadmap, and we have this roadmap now. This roadmap is Sustainable Development Goals agenda, because all the challenges we have in front of us are covered by this roadmap. And that's why SDGs now are more relevant than before the pandemic. And we really have to work very hard on all the SDGs, because we have gender, we have poverty, we have climate change, we have partnerships, everything among the 17th SDGs. But apart from the roadmap, you do need instruments. And it's absolutely clear that instruments should be multilateral cooperation. Again, multilateralism, we need it more than before the pandemic. But when we're speaking about multilateralism, it's not about the multilateralism which was born here in Geneva more than 100 years ago, when it was a multilateralism among the member states. And at that time, it was not all the member states, all the countries existing in the world, but the chosen few. Then came the United Nations. Again, the number of member states when it was created was far less than now. And of course, as it was rightly said, the voices of many smaller nations were not properly heard. We really need a modern multilateralism for the 21st century. And it was obviously said, like it was said by Madame la Présidente, member states are not the only actors in the agenda. We really, in order to promote sustainable development goals, to find global challenges, find global solutions to global challenges, we have to work together, all the actors. We need international organizations and also regional organizations in order to work together. We need the private sector. That's quite obvious, and it was also mentioned that without private sector, we can't find global solutions. And for example, yesterday, when all of us experienced some kind of internet withdrawal, with the problems facing Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, really you realize how dependent we are on these instruments, which have become public instruments, but they are really still the instruments provided to us by the private sector. And now I'm really speaking how important it's to work together with the private sector, because if we want to find answers to these challenges, we really have to work with it. So non-governmental organizations and civil society, it's absolutely clear that if we are not working together, we are not finding the solutions. Academia and experts and many other groups. Why I think it's ideal that we have this conversation here in Geneva, because Geneva is a unique ecosystem where we really have all these key international actors, the representatives of the member states, 181 missions, international organizations, private sector, non-governmental organizations, academia, and we've been trying for many years to work together. Now I'm very happy that this cooperation is giving us certain results, and I'm very grateful for your ideas, discussions over these 2 months, because 2 days, because it's really the food for thought, which would allow us as organization, United Nations, to find responses to global challenges and to try to lead the global discussions on these issues. Once again, thank you very much for your bright ideas and looking forward to our further meetings.
Thank you, Madam Director General, and we're really grateful for your leadership in this initiative and for support. As Madam President Vaira Vike-Freiberga, we are grateful that to have a woman leadership in these initiatives. And especially we're expecting you very soon in a couple of weeks in Baku for the Global Baku Forum. Sometimes we're always discussing why this kind of international organizations or these meetings are important. Recently we had during the UN General Assembly a discussion in New York as a side event to the UN General Assembly. And there was like one dinner which we hosted with our awardees. And there was all discussion, especially President Mladen Ivanic can confirm that. We had a discussion about future of Afghanistan and what's going to happen with Afghanistan and how the world allowing the same mistakes is happening again and again. And at the end, yesterday and the day before, we have that information. Our friend who was colleague and they've been started releasing 120 and plus and another 120 Afghanistan families out of Afghanistan, and making them to be releasing in Tajikistan or in Albania. And that's an important part of the institutions and organizations why we are gathering together and why we are sharing our ideas. With that, I would like to ask President Rosen Plevneliev for his remarks.
Thank you, dear Rovshan, Your Excellency, Madam Director General, Your Excellencies, Head of State and Government, dear friends. We want to thank all of you for giving us the opportunity to be here. I learned a lot. We all learned a lot. We heard great ideas, and I want to make a very clear pledge on behalf of NGIC, which is a global organization. It is an organization that stands behind values, and whatever we do is based on values. We believe in human rights. We believe in rule of law. We believe in peace and tolerance and understanding between the different cultures, and we work very heavily for that. So the pledge I want to make on my capacity as a board member of NGIC is that the great ideas, solutions, debates we had yesterday and today we will put into the agenda of the upcoming Global Baku Forum, which is where we will come hundreds of world leaders, but not just political leaders, heads of state and government. We will have religious leaders all over the world. We will have young leaders all over the world. We will have society leaders, NGOs, business leaders coming together year by year into celebrating what we believe in. And that's exactly what we also spoke here today and yesterday about the future of our planet. We are all very concerned, and at NGIC we are very concerned. But as we said yesterday and today, just to be concerned is not enough. And we brought a lot of good ideas and brought a lot of solutions. And let me point, as being a positive person, about some great things happening in some countries, simple to be done, no money at all, but it works, and it works perfectly. And yes, we have responsible leadership, and yes, we have good examples. For example, if you look at 2 months ago, the government of Greece has made a very simple law, just one page, and it is saying, if it's forest, it's a forest. You can't touch it. You can't make it an agricultural land. You can't make it a construction land. You can't touch it. It remains a forest. Such a great example of what we can do in responsible governments. Or, for example, look at Estonia, which just decided to make e-government as a result of the great example which Estonia is giving to all of us today, much more advanced than any other country in the world in e-government. You have a paperless government office. They don't need a paper. You're solving the issue of gender inequalities because everybody is equal, because gets one and the same service in the most transparent and efficient way. It is solving the issue of trust between people and governments because there is no other way but to increase trust when the government is predictable and transparent during the ideas of having a government in place. Estonia is giving us a great example. But also we can see today an example of Romania where a law has been passed that for equal work, you need to have an equal payment. Or, for example, just 2 weeks ago in Germany, they passed a law that is saying we are closing all power coal stations and all coal mines by 2037. I wish it could be a bit more ambitious, but still it's a clear signal. We're closing something that heavily pollutes our planet and destroys, in a way, the perspective for our children. And last but not least, I can even give my country as an example where, in a very responsible way, generation after generation of politicians, they've done something very simple. In the European Union, we have the so-called Natura 2000 regulations, where you decide how many of the territory of your country, how much you can put into the highest environmental standards in the world, which is the European Natura 2000 standard. And different countries are doing different numbers, but Bulgaria is number one. Actually, if you look at Austria, it's 14% of territory. Bulgaria has done 1/3 of its territory. 33% of our territory is totally controlled under the highest environmental standards in the world. And I can sit in front of you and say that actually in my country, since 25, 30 years, actually the number of forests is increasing, is not decreasing. And that's a wise policy done by a generation of politicians which managed to get a consensus of how environmental issues are important, and they stick to that. So make it better and not making it worse. To close my remarks, we learned a lot. We share the same passion. We share the same solutions. The UN and NGIC have shown today how greatly we kind of synchron to each other. And we will continue fighting for the plan we already have. And that is the only working plan for the planet. And that is the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, need to be dispersed. They need to be implemented. They need to bring results to all of us. And that's what we're going to do. We have a plan. Let's deliver on that. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you so much for especially underlining about the lack of the leadership that the world is facing, and also that the world is not having a plan B. We have only one planet, and we have to fight for that. And the role of our members and who had the experience of leading the governments and the countries It's crucial things. And now I would like to ask Zlatko Lagumzia, who was attending 2 panels already, that he has well aware of the discussions we had. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Rovshan, very much. And of course, first I want to thank extraordinary core force that stands behind us, which is Secretariat of NGIC. Rovshan, to you, and of course to Elaha, to Torgul Elasim, who are here. And just it's really honor and privilege to see how much we can do with such a small number of people who are devoted to the same mission that we share and the same values that we share. So I want to thank you first, because without your invisible support, this would not be possible. Of course, as Rovshan said, I was actively participating in 2 panels, but as a good student that Ismail taught me some years ago that I should become ultimately the student, I was doing a lot of notes on the previous 2 panels as well, which I was not actively participating. And I can tell you one thing, that definitely these 2 valuable days are for me valuable days when I learned a lot. But not only that I learned a lot, but it strengthened me, and I'm sure that it strengthened all of us in our conviction, what Rosen was talking about also, that we have to do our best to be part of the better future based on our shared values. Shared values, shared societies with shared vision, and that's what NGIC is basically about. When in these 4 panels, I heard so many times the word change of this, change of that, and change of us, but change along the lines of SDGs that are comprehensive set of changes that were never put before in the history of humankind, that got a global institutional, and not only institutional, but multi-stakeholders support like SDGs got. In that context, I think that it is, since we are living and we spent last year or more than a year after pandemic, thanks to you, Rovshan, mostly, I mean, being together in the cyberspace, being together by being apart, thanks to so many conferences, not only I'm mentioning New York, but New York, and this one is saying that we are moving forward in Baku, that we will be physically together and we'll be able to overcome that obstacle. But we shared so many cyberspace in different occasions along the NGIC family. We were mostly focused on looking for new normal, looking for post-pandemic time in time of deep pandemic destructions. And I could make, especially, I mean, connecting this SDGs with what we've been saying, talking to almost 2 years since pandemic started. There were sometimes I used a comparison of pandemic with Black Death, and Black Death was followed by Renaissance. And it took, let's say, from 13th century, 15th and 14th and 15th century, and then we got in 17th and 18th with Enlightenment time. So it looks like maybe it looks like we are now in search for post-corona time, which requires new Renaissance, a new enlightenment, and we sometimes like to say. Since those 3 things, Black Plague, Renaissance, and Enlightenment, took almost 5 centuries, I have reason to be optimistic, because the speed of change that we were talking about so much, our might in sense of technology and economy and knowledge that is gathering, it is created while we are talking with the speed of light, is actually giving us hope that new Renaissance and new Enlightenment may require not few centuries, but few years that are ahead of us. And that's how I see our search for new Renaissance with our Renaissance man, Ismail, leading us. And I'm very happy to be chaired as an NGIC with 2 wise person, Vika and Ismail, who I learned so much about in these years that were behind us. In that context, I think it is, I'm optimistic about this new Renaissance and new Enlightenment time. I'm optimistic about the strength of values and strength of our commitment to be let's say, trying to make them alive as much as we can individually. And then in that case, we will be able to do it collectively as well. I want to, as one of the key words of those 4 sessions, neither session was identified with the key word, but it popped out of everything, which is education. And I think that education is the underlying force that is behind this. And I'll conclude with something, my personal remark. In Geneva, I was back in 92, 93 in these very buildings dealing with humanitarian aid in a country that's called Bosnia and Herzegovina, it still is called that way, in charge as the deputy prime minister of the first independent government dealing with humanitarian aid. And in these buildings, convening with the people who are chairing Red Cross, UNHCR, and other institutions in here. And I remember a Dayton Peace Accord was brought in the end. We were unhappy, Mlad and myself, we were all unhappy. We thought that something could be more fair to us, if I can put it that way. But I was comforting myself with the words of great Willy Brandt, who used to say that peace is not everything, but without peace, nothing is possible. And our keyword peace is the key word that we can replace peace with some other things that we're talking about. Peace is not everything, but without peace, nothing is possible. And in time that is we are confronting, we have to remember that old line. But at the same time, we can say that economy is not everything, but without economy, nothing substantial is possible. We can say also that without education is not everything, but without education, nothing in the future is possible. And finally, without environment, definitely. Environment is not everything, but without environment, nothing is possible. So in that context, I think that we are on a good journey to be part of the peaceful world, which requires prosperity, planet people be in some kind of cohabitation, and sometimes to be together, because as I can rephrase, prosperity is not everything, but without prosperity, nothing is possible. People are not everything, but without people, nothing is possible. And finally, I mean, planet is not everything, but without planet, definitely nothing is possible. And if we don't get in order, we should not be worrying about planet so much. If there is no us, planet would be just fine. So we have to see how we should be better and how we should have in mind that planet is not everything, but without planet, nothing is possible. Having said so, I'm absolutely sure that I will now listen wise words of my dear Hakim and my great friend, Las Leonardo, as Rovshan reminds me every time, because I use that phrase one, and I'm so proud that I got it right. And every day and every new gathering reminds me, Ismail, that it is possible to come to the Renaissance because we have people of Renaissance mind like you are. So thank you very much. And once again, thank you for everyone who participated. You would be surprised how many notes I made in my little black book. I learned a lot, and I'm really stronger today than I was 2 days ago. Thank you so much.
I'm always jealous about the special note papers that Prime Minister Zlatko is having, and he gave me once, but it's never enough, just to get it. Thank you so much, Prime Minister, and for being a motor and pushing up NGIC for doing all these initiatives in the Western Balkans, definitely, and also with SDG and our recent event in New York, which was it's not about only events that NGIC is doing, but it's event and a group of people, like-minded people, that they can come together, and they are, because the world is facing a lack of leadership today, and like-minded people bringing together with scholars, with academicians, with Nobel laureates to discuss about the things that what we are facing today. We have no other choices. Populism is rising up, and we have a crisis on the economy. We have a crisis on the health issues. We have COVID-19, which is sometimes we are even thinking. I'm always thinking, do we need to talk about the post-COVID era or the with COVID-19 era periods? That because everyone is every single country been affected. We saw superpower countries being affected with a COVID-19. That's issues that bringing up like-minded people and to have their advisors, the experience is really important for the current leadership but also for the international organizations that like United Nations. And with that, I'm really happy to have Dr. Ismail Serageldin, our co-chair and former vice president of the World Bank. Dr. Ismail.
Thank you, Rovshan, and I would like to join in thanking our Secretary General, our Secretariat, Ilaha, Togrol, Asim, all of the people who worked here, along with all the people from the United Nations that have helped make this event possible. Gathering together, exchanging views is extremely important. We get to be reminded of where our shortcomings are, but we also get to be reminded of the optimism that we can bring because there are good examples. And again, on this panel, I'm particularly grateful to President Plevneliev for bringing forward positive examples, for there are too many of the negative examples that we can say. I will not try to repeat or to try to capture all that Vice President, sorry, something here is not, these are the tyranny of the machines.
Facebook works.
Facebook works again, so I'm told. But I will simply say that regretfully, we are a planet in crisis. Humanity is in crisis. We have seen recently everything from forest fires in California to floods in Germany and Austria to famines in southern Madagascar to many other things. And we are still at 1.1 degrees. We're not even close yet to 1.5 degrees, much as 2 degrees that we adopted in Paris. And yet, we are on a path which is going towards 4 degrees. So this is just not enough. And we must do much more. And for that, I have only 2 people that I would like to cite. One is a very exceptional man, and he spoke to us almost as if he was with us today, saying, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune, omitted all the voyage of their lives is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. That was William Shakespeare. But more importantly, whereas he warned of what was going on, there is a counter voice, a beautiful counter voice, coming from a very remarkable woman that I hope more people would know. Her name was Carrie Chapman Catt. She was a very important suffragette in the 19th and to the 20th century, from half to 19th, half to 20th century. She lived and militated for the status of women. And her message is the only thing I can leave with everyone here, because she said it so beautifully, there's nothing I can add. She said, to the wrongs that need resistance, to the right that needs assistance, to the future in the distance, let us give ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ismail. And for the last, as a closing, I would like to once more to thank the Office of the United Nations Office at Geneva, and especially Dr. David Shikwaidze and Director General and all the staff members for their continuous support and dedication and being a friend with us. And we learned a lot from them, and we are looking forward to our next journey in Baku. Thank you so much, and we are at your disposal for any questions you may have. You can reach out our office. Ilaha is here, and all our staff members. And thank you so much once again.